Coming up on Network Africa, Uganda's president calls for East African leaders summit to discuss Ethiopia conflict. U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia allows voluntary departure of some staff as it says it's gravely concerned about escalating violence in the country. Plus, Democratic Republic of Congo announces new Ebola cases. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin with the situation in Ethiopia. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has called for a meeting of East African leaders to discuss the Tigray conflict. The meeting has been called for November the 16th. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy Jeffrey Feltman is in Addis Ababa to discuss the conflict amid rising concerns that it could escalate further.
Urgent new efforts to calm the escalating war are underway as Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni calls an East African Leaders Summit on November 16th to discuss the conflict, and the President of neighboring Kenya calls for an immediate ceasefire. The United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa is also in the country to meet government representatives. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has voiced concern at the escalating situation, saying the stability of Ethiopia and the wider region is at stake.
The Secretary General reiterated his call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, unrestricted humanitarian access to deliver urgent life-saving assistance, and an inclusive dialogue to resolve this crisis and create the foundation for peace and stability throughout the country. The Secretary General is deeply concerned that the recent escalation and widening of armed conflict and the declaration of the state of emergency will only aggravate the human rights situation of the people of Ethiopia. He calls once again for the fighting to stop immediately. The Secretary General stresses that ultimately, the current crisis in Ethiopia can only be resolved around the negotiation table and by including all of Ethiopia's people and leaders.
The UN also says Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Wednesday to offer mediation support, but both sides in this conflict have previously dismissed negotiations. Instead, in a defiant speech to mark the first anniversary of the war, Prime Minister Ahmed, the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize winner, has again called citizens to take up arms and fight armed rebels advancing on the capital, Addis Ababa. Ethiopian authorities on Tuesday announced a 6-month nationwide state of emergency. Tigrayan rebels and troops allied against Ethiopia's central government are rapidly advancing on Addis Ababa, raising concerns that the capital could fall. The rebel forces claim to have taken another town, Kemise, along a major highway 330 kilometers north of Addis Ababa. Tigray conflict has killed thousands, displaced over 2 million, and fueled famine. On Wednesday, a joint investigation published by the United Nations and Ethiopia said all sides fighting in the war had committed violations that may amount to war crimes. The joint investigation team uncovered numerous violations and abuses, including unlawful killings and extrajudicial executions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, violations against refugees, and forced displacement of civilians.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia has authorized the voluntary departure of non-emergency government staff and family members as rebel forces in the country's north make advances. The decision came after the United States said on Wednesday it was gravely concerned about the escalating violence and expansion of hostilities, repeating a call for a halt to military operations in favor of ceasefire talks. The embassy said in a statement that travel to Ethiopia is unsafe and further escalation is likely, adding that the government of Ethiopia has previously restricted or shut down the internet, cellular data and phone services during and after civil unrest. Government spokesperson did not immediately respond to calls seeking comment on the U.S. Embassy statement. The Ethiopian government has accused the U.S. of siding with the TPLF. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more on America's response to this conflict. Maria, as the U.S. says, is gravely concerned and allows voluntary departure of some embassy staff. We know that its envoy, Jeffrey Feltman, is in Ethiopia as the country's civil war continues to escalate. What more can you tell us about the aim of this visit?
This visit is really about looking at the humanitarian components. We know that early on in the Biden administration, there was hope and there was a focus on being able to continue and enhance the relations in the continent. And so I think that's part of what we're seeing here, the humanitarian efforts that obviously are in jeopardy at this time. And as you mentioned, those non-emergency personnel from the U.S. that are within the U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia are being allowed to leave in their families just due to what I think the U.S. is expecting to be potentially a very difficult time and a challenging time for Ethiopia that could obviously put many in danger.
Has warned that Ethiopia will lose access to a lucrative U.S. trade program due to human rights violations unless it takes significant steps towards ending the ongoing conflict by the start of 2022. But with the way things are going, can we expect more economic sanctions in the coming days? What are you hearing?
Yes, the economic sanctions are always the first measure, as we know, whether or not it's the U.S., whether or not it's any country that they put forth as a way to try to deter and to move forward with what they believe is the best course moving in the direction. And so the U.S. is doing nothing but is traditional in the manner of looking at the economic sanctions. Now, the challenge with that it brings, there is a lot of trade programs that have been put in place over the past 20 years as it relates to Ethiopia. So that would obviously impact the U.S. as well. But again, the humanitarian components that have obviously been stressed as a concern of the U.S. are ones that the U.S. is willing to at least put as a priority and see how they can be of assistance in ensuring the safety and security of the people of Ethiopia, because we all know that the economic devastation does occur when you do have continued civil unrest for extended periods of time.
All right then, Maria, thanks a lot for the update.
Thank you for having me.
Over in South Sudan, across the country, tangible remnants of conflicts remain in the form of landmines and explosive remnants of war. These pose a daily threat to women, children and men in remote locations. The United Nations Mine Action Service has been working in South Sudan since 2004, clearing some 45 million square meters of land contaminated by explosive hazards. Recently, UNMAS held a training for National Mine Action Authority counterparts on destroying these highly dangerous reminders of war in a safe and secure manner.
Now, this team is a mobile team, and it's an explosive ordnance disposal team that responds to the needs of communities, to the boys, girls, women and men who live in areas that are unfortunately contaminated by explosive hazards. What we've seen today is a briefing. What we've seen today is a professional disposal of those dangerous items. And what we've seen is a professional team which is deployable around the country as they move forward to be able to react to those communities that need that sort of support.
We choose this community because we got a call from the community that there are some spot tasks of US coast, which the community needs to be got rid of. That's why currently we are focusing in this area. We need to get rid of those UXOs which they have found, because if they are left like that, they will pose danger to them, to their children, and also to their animals.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Senate has extended the state of siege in North Kivu and Ituri provinces. This is the 11th time it has been prolonged in efforts to restore security in the east. Justice Minister Rose Mutombo presented the bill to the Senate and explained the efforts of the army to restore security in the region. The Senate Speaker says that 89 members participated in the vote, with 84 supporting the extension. Meanwhile, health officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo have confirmed 8 new Ebola virus cases in North Kivu province. This marks a new outbreak in the country. The WHO's Regional Office for Africa says of the 8 cases, there's been 6 fatalities. Some 573 people who had been exposed to the virus have been identified. The country has had a resurgence of the virus cases this year. A previous Ebola outbreak in the country was declared over in May 2021. It had claimed the lives of 2,287 people since August 2018. Now let's head back to the Ethiopia-Tigray conflict as East African leaders prepare to hold a summit on November the 16th on the conflict. Our VOA correspondent Mohammed Yusuf is in neighboring Kenya. He joins us now for more on this. Mohammed, a year of this conflict, which seems endless at this point, but East African leaders are just calling for a meeting. Why now?
Yeah, this is generally in Ethiopia in itself. There's been conflict going on there for more than a year now. It's been a year since that conflict began in northern Tigray. And African leaders have been trying to push for a ceasefire and negotiations, and that has gone into deaf ears, and both people in northern Ethiopia were reluctant to listen to. But now we are seeing more voices around the world, including East Africa, that they need these leaders and Ethiopia, those who are involved in the conflict, to come together and agree on a way forward, because the view is that the conflict has been there for a year now, is not a solution. And that is part also around the world, and Western governments are also calling for a ceasefire and a dialogue and a political solution to the crisis. And Kenya, for example, as a neighbor, they have intensified security operations in the north of the country at the border between the two countries. The neighboring also Uganda has also called for a meeting. The East Africa Regional Bloc eager to come together and talk about the issues that is taking place in Ethiopia.
Bearing in mind that, like you mentioned, both sides in this conflict have rejected negotiations in the past, what is this likely to achieve? Can we expect economic sanctions?
Well, what we this week so far, Ethiopia has been suspended. It means that they cannot access the American market under the AGOA, and that is an economic sanction itself. And now we have the U.S. envoy to Ethiopia now, to Horn of Africa in Ethiopia for a 2-day visit. He went there today. He already met the AU Commission Chair, Musa Faki, and also talking about the same issues of dialogue and a ceasefire. And it seems to be pushing, and later today, or before he leaves tomorrow on Friday, he will be meeting the Prime Minister Abiy. So there's a lot of concerted effort now being driven across the country that there's a need for dialogue. And this comes at a time, of course, when the rebel groups are advancing. They have been advancing to Addis. They're about 100 to 200 kilometers away from the capital. And there is generally fear that if Addis Ababa collapses, then we're going to face a major problem in the region. And of course, Ethiopia being the second most populous nation in the continent after Nigeria is going to cause a very big problem for the region. And now there's that big push. Of course, we're going to see a situation where much more countries are going to push for economic sanctions before an individual sanctions kicks in. And that's where now things are headed. And people do hope that now with the US envoy in Addis, you may be able to bring up these people together and then find a solution to that crisis.
And Mohammed, how is the Kenyan president responding to all this? We know the country has increased security along its borders.
Yeah, generally Kenya issued the Kenyan president Uhuru Kenyatta issued a statement on Wednesday, calling for an end to that conflict, and he would like to see those leaders in Ethiopia coming together and talking and bringing and finding a solution to the crisis that we've seen for a year. And of course, Ethiopia has also a bigger problem. This has been going on for 30 years. There have been protests in the previous years before the Prime Minister resigned, former Prime Minister Haile Mariam resigned. And Kenya, as an immediate neighbor, of course, they're hosting hundreds and thousands of refugees from Somalia, South Sudan, Burundi, some from Uganda. And they feel in that burden, and they don't want to see another country collapse, a neighbor like Ethiopia, which has more than 100 million population. And then most of those people, of course, will be coming to Kenya. And this is a situation where Kenya is also trying to avoid. They don't want to see a refugee influx in the region, and most of those refugees, of course, will come to Kenya. And now that is what Kenya is fearing, and there's an idea, a notion that Kenya should be on the forefront, helping Ethiopia now to, of course, to find a peace that's been lacking in the past year.
All right, then, VOA correspondent Mohammed Yusuf, thank you so much for the update. Still to come on the program.
To resolve this crisis.
Two arrested in Mozambique for forging COVID-19 vaccine cards. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The Mozambican police say they have detained two health workers for their alleged involvement in the forgery, issuing and sale of COVID-19 vaccine cards. The two, a government general medical practitioner and an intern, had been assigned to the Bagamoyo Health Center in the capital, Maputo. Police seized the forged cards and various medical material, including medicine, from them. The cards were being sold at $235 each. Police say the two will be charged in court. Mozambique's military chief says some troops fighting Islamist insurgents in the north of the country have been abusing civilians and stealing property. Admiral Joaquim Mangrace says about 30 soldiers have been detained, accused of looting banks in the town of Palma, which was seized briefly by the militants earlier this year. Troops have also stolen domestic goods and crops from villages, and they've been accused of killing and torturing people suspected of having links with the jihadists. In 2019, scientists working for South Africa's government completed a study on the health impacts of pollution from the country's sprawling coal industry. So far, it has not seen the light of day. The study shows more than 5,000 South Africans die annually in the country's coal belt because the government has failed to enforce its own air quality standards.
For local Malaleni mother, Mbali Matabule, the impact of coal has been severely traumatic for her and her daughter, Princess. In May 2018, as she approached her 4th birthday, Princess started struggling to breathe. Matabule rushed out to the hospital, where a doctor put a mask on Princess's face attached to a nebulizer. Matabule was shocked to find out that Princess had asthma. 3 years later, Matabule lives in constant fear that her daughter will not survive the disease.
They don't help us in any way as a community. Our houses are cracked because of the blasting. The blast can be 4 to 5 times a day, and since we are so close to the mine, the dust comes to us in our homes. I get very concerned because I feel like my child won't live for a long time. It means anytime she could die because of our situation.
A doctor who practices in the coal mine town says that respiratory diseases are very common amongst adults and children because of the pollution they are exposed to on a daily basis.
Most of the doctors around, we have sort of become experts in treating allergic rhinitis and asthma simply because there's so much of it. And I also mentioned the fact that one could say is environmental.
Smog released from burning coal is laced with chemicals like sulfur and nitrogen oxides, mercury and lead, and radioactive elements like uranium and thorium.
We can't live comfortably because of the dust and coal that smells from the mine dump. We are not the ones burning coal, but we are the ones suffering from the smoke.
A 2019 Council for Scientific and Industrial Research study concluded that 5,125 lives could be saved every year in the coal belt by enforcing national air quality standards on soot, otherwise known as particulate matter. According to the non-profit Global Carbon Atlas, South Africa is the world's 12th largest greenhouse gas emitter. This water-stressed country also stands to be one of the big losers from climate change.
Since Lake Fagubine in northern Mali dried up, communities on its parched shores have had to defend their homes from encroaching sand dunes while finding new ways to make a living from the degraded soil. With recurrent drought and high temperatures, the lake evaporated, economic activity wilted, and insecurity rose, forcing many residents to leave.
In the 1970s, the region around northern Mali's Lake Fagubine was a hub for trade and fishing, agriculture, forestry, and livestock. The lake, which was once one of the largest in West Africa, used to be fed by annual flooding from the Niger River. It started to disappear after catastrophic droughts in the 1970s, forcing more than 200,000 people to abandon their traditional livelihoods.
All this area was covered by water. Then the water receded and trees started to grow around the lake. Then the trees started to disappear and people grew crops where the trees used to be. During the first rebellion, displaced persons arrived. They destroyed the forest, and once the forest was gone, sand dunes formed.
Now, he and other inhabitants of the formerly lakeside villages west of Timbuktu have to walk long distances to find water for their livestock and build barriers out of sticks in an effort to keep the dunes at bay. According to the UN climate body, the shrinking population of Lake Fagubine is set to come under further pressure from climate change. In the village of Bintagunu, the advancing dunes have buried the schoolyard and cracked the empty building's foundation.
This is a school for almost 400 students. 400 students, that's an entire generation. A lost generation, a generation condemned to flee or to be recruited.
According to a 2016 study, in the African Journal of Aquatic Science, efforts to boost resilience by restoring Fagubine's wetlands and the area's role as the breadbasket of the Timbuktu region have been derailed by waves of conflict, most recently a years-long Islamist insurgency.
For the first time in 10 years, Libya's Ministry of Tourism has taken a group of foreign tourists on a visit to the country's natural and historical sites. Libya has been plagued by conflict and instability since a NATO-backed uprising overthrew longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi, thrusting the North African country into chaos and plunging its economy into ruin.
Italian student Eduardo Rione felt a little afraid when he joined a rare tourist group trip to Libya this month, but he said he soon enjoyed the visit to desert cities and Roman ruins in a country unsettled by years of chaos.
My friends tell me, do you want to come in Libya? I say, okay, I'm a little bit afraid, but after this amazing trip, I can say that Libya is really an amazing place, and all the tourists can come here and visit it and stay really comfortable and not to be afraid.
The organizers said the tour group visited the southern city of Ghadames and the Akakis Mountains, a site of ancient rock art. Half the group also visited the Roman city of Sabratha, a trip to Leptis Magna, and the best known of Libya's Roman sites, may also feature on a future visit.
We didn't feel in danger for sure. Of course, the big part of the trip was in the desert, so not too many contact with people. Just we stopped in Gadames and in Gat mainly, and then now in Tripoli. So in the desert, of course, you don't feel in danger, but even in the city, like when we enter today in Tripoli or in Gadames, we feel okay.
Despite a UN-backed peace plan and a ceasefire since last year between the main eastern and western factions, any more wide-scale return of tourism seems unlikely. Before Libya fell apart in 2011, difficult visa regimens meant only up to 25,000 tourists visited a year. Since the revolution, hardly any have risked the trip. An election plan for December is still a subject of wrangling, and any major delay to the vote or dispute over its validity could plunge Libya back into a full-blown civil war.
Security is a relative thing. The concept of safety could differ in the opinion of Europeans compared to us. As such, we have social security, which plays a huge role. Libya is a vast and large country. We're trying to imagine how things will be, and to be honest, I believe tourism may be in the culture of neighboring countries, but for us Libyans, I think this is new for us.
The travel agency that brought the tourists said it had been working to arrange the trip since 2018. In a sign of how difficult such visits remain in Libya, it had to postpone it because of war in 2019.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Bye for now.